Okay, hi everyone. Welcome back. It's been a while since I've done a live stream, so I'd like to continue with our with Windows Server 2003. So look here and share. So here we are, installing and configuring TCP/IP. Microsoft exam objectives covered in this chapter. Configure TCP/IP addressing on a server computer. Troubleshoot TCP/IP addressing. Diagnose and resolve issues related to APIPA, diagnose and resolve issues related to incorrect TCP/IP configuration, troubleshoot connectivity to the internet, monitor network traffic. Tools might include Network Monitor and System Monitor. So Windows Server 2003 includes support for the same network protocols as Windows 2000 and NT4. Some of these protocols, like TCP, have assumed new importance. Others, like NetBEUI, are being quietly phased out. This chapter will focus on how to configure and troubleshoot TCP/IP. By the time you finish this chapter, you'll know how to set configuration parameters for TCP/IP and configure the bindings that attach protocols to particular network interface cards, NICs. You'll also learn how to monitor and troubleshoot TCP/IP and internet connectivity using built-in tools such as Network Monitor, Ping, ipconfig, and TreeCert. Configuring basic TCP/IP settings. TCP/IP is installed automatically as part of the Windows Server 2003 setup process and cannot be removed. It cannot be installed manually. You have the opportunity to configure TCP/IP settings in the Configure Your Server wizard, which appears automatically after boot up. When you install TCP/IP, it defaults to using Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, DHCP, for automatic configuration, which will be explained in the next section and later in this book. If you want to use DHCP for automatic configuration, you certainly can. Servers typically use static addressing. However, as a network administrator, and because you will be tested on it, you should know how to manually configure TCP/IP connection. If you are under the impression that TCP/IP is difficult to configure, configuring it using Windows Server 2003 Internet Protocol TCP/IP properties dialog box may surprise you. TCP/IP actually requires only two pieces of information to function: the IP address you want to use for this system, the subnet mask that corresponds to the network subnet the client is on. Figure 2.1 shows the Internet Protocol TCP/IP properties dialog box. You get this dialog box by selecting Start Control Panel Network Connections Local Area Connection icon, selecting the Internet Protocol TCP/IP protocol, and clicking the Properties button. Of course, if you have multiple network adapters in a single computer, you can set independent TCP/IP properties for each adapter. Depending on what you want to do, you'll use either the automatic configuration buttons or the text fields. So you can see here figure 2.1, the TCP/IP properties dialog box. Now that you understand the basic elements of the Internet Protocol TCP/IP properties dialog box, we'll show you how to configure the various settings. Configuring automatic TCP/IP settings. The Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol is a server-based service that is designed to automate configuration of TCP/IP clients. You can put one or more DHCP servers on your network, program them with a wide range of network addresses and other configuration parameters, and let clients automatically obtain IP addressing information without manual intervention With appropriate DHCP configurations, your TCP IP clients running any operating system that has DHCP support can be configured with little or no manual intervention from you. If you're configuring a Windows 2000 Professional or XP Professional machine, chances are probably good that you're using DHCP with it. In that case, the default TCP IP settings will work fine for you because they configure the TCP IP stack to get configuration parameters from any available DHCP server. You can mix and match DHCP and non-DHCP machines on the same network as long as they use addresses in the same subnet range. On a single client, you can use DHCP to get everything except DNS addresses if you want to. On the Internet Protocol TCP IP properties dialog box, you have two options for configuring the computer for automatic addressing. To configure a computer to get its TCP IP configuration information from a DHCP server, leave the Obtain an IP address automatically radio button selected. If you're using DHCP for basic IP addressing and you want to accept DNS server addresses from the DHCP server as well, leave the Obtain DNS server address automatically radio button selected. The biggest thing to be aware of before enabling any DHCP clients is that you need a DHCP server for them to talk to. Windows 98, 2000 XP and Server 2003 computers have a feature built into them called Automatic Private IP Addressing, APIPA, that can cause unintended consequences when you enable DHCP on the client without a DHCP server present. For instance, if you switch a client into DHCP mode, it'll pick up an address in the 169.254.x.y.z class B address space, and unless the address space is already in use on your network, your client will have difficulty talking to other computers on the network. More precisely, all clients that can't reach the DHCP server will have addresses in the same range and they'll be able to see only each other. Each time a client fails to connect to a DHCP server, it picks an address from the 169.254 range and broadcasts it. If no other client answers the broadcast, the client uses the address as if it were manually assigned. However, the client knows that this isn't a real DHCP address, so it keeps attempting to renew its lease every 5 minutes. Leases are discussed in more depth in Chapter 5, Managing the Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. Once it succeeds its transparently switches to the DHCP address. There is a new feature in Windows Server 2003 called alternate configuration. Using alternate configuration, if a DHCP server is unavailable, you can have the computer switch to an alternate static configuration instead of the 169.254.x.y range. Take a look at it. Open the Internet Protocol TCP/IP properties dialog box. Make sure that the computer is configured to obtain its address automatically. If it is, then at the top of the dialog box, click the Alternate Configuration tab. Notice that the Automatic Private IP Address radio button is selected by default. Click the User Configured radio button. You can now enter a complete alternate static configuration, including a default gateway and 2 DNS and WIN servers. Figure 2.2 shows you what the alternate configuration tab looks like. So you can see here, figure 2.2. You might wonder When would you use an alternate configuration? There are two possibilities. The first possibility would be if, for instance, if you had Windows Server 2003 installed on a portable computer and you need to dial up an ISP that doesn't support DHCP. Another possibility is for system backup. Although very expensive, it's possible to have secondary servers online configured in the alternate address scheme, ready to accept requests when the DHCP server goes down. The problem here is keeping the primary servers and the secondary servers in sync. In any of these cases, alternate configuration is a new and very viable feature. If you do not have DHCP servers, you should verify that at least one of them is authorized. Here's one caveat that's mentioned in Microsoft's documentation. A Windows 2000 server or a Windows Server 2003 machine running a DHCP service must have a static IP address. Don't expect to be able to use the DHCP client on your servers if you're running DHCP or DNS service on them. In exercise 2.1, you will learn how to configure a Windows Server 2003 computer to use a DHCP client. 1. Select Start Control Panel Network Connections. 2. Right-click the local area connection icon. Choose Properties. If you have more than one LAN adapter, choose the one you want to configure. 3. The Local Area Connection Properties dialog box appears. Select Internet Protocol TCP/IP. From this connection uses the following list item. 4. Click the Properties button. The Internet Protocol TCP/IP Properties dialog box appears. 5. To turn on DHCP, click the Obtain an IP address automatically radio button. 6. To enable your client to get DNS server information from the DHCP server, select the Obtain DNS server address automatically radio button. 7. Click OK to close the click OK to close the Internet Protocol TCP/IP Properties dialog box. 8. Click OK to close the Local Area Connection Properties dialog box. Configuring manual TCP/IP settings. We recommend not using DHCP on servers because they're not nearly as dynamic as clients. Ideally, you won't reboot servers unless they need it, and you won't be moving them around. Therefore, the dynamic in DHCP isn't really useful, and its other benefits are outweighed by the comfort that comes from knowing that your server has the correct and unchanging IP configuration. If you want to configure the TCP/IP settings yourself, start by selecting use the following IP address radio button in the Internet Protocol TCP/IP Properties dialog box, and then fill in the other fields as follows. In the IP address field, enter the IP address you want to use for this machine. Remember that Windows Server 2003 won't verify that the address is unique or that it matches the local subnet. The most common mistake people make with this field is to enter an address that doesn't match the address range they're using on their network, or adding an address that is already in use on another machine. In the subnet mask field, enter the appropriate subnet mask for your network. Enter the gateway or router address you want the computer to use in the default gateway field if you want this machine to be able to route packets to other networks. Again, make sure it's right. If you're using DNS on your network, use the following DNS server addresses radio button and enter the first DNS server you want this client to talk to in the preferred DNS server field. It is critical to get this right on a Windows Server 2003 network because DNS is required for Active Directory. See Chapter 3, Administering Security policy. For more information, Active Directory. If you want to specify another server, which we recommend to use when the preferred server is unavailable or can't resolve a DNS query, enter it in the alternate DNS server field. You can also specify additional servers, as you'll see in the following section on the advanced TCP/IP settings dialog box. The preferred DNS server should be the DNS server that is physically closest on the client computer. It's important to note that manual DNS settings override DNS settings obtained from a DHCP server. Exercise 2.2 shows you how to manually configure an IP address on any Windows Server 2003 computer. Manually configure TCP/IP. 1. Select Start Control Panel Network Connections. 2. Right-click the local area connection icon. Choose Properties. If you have more than one LAN adapter, choose the one you want to configure. 3. The local area connection properties dialog box appears. Select Internet Protocol TCP/IP. From this connection, uses the following items list. 4. Click the Properties button. The Internet Protocol TCP/IP properties dialog box appears. 5. To manually enter an IP address, use the following IP address radio button. Enter your IP address, subnet mask, and default gateway in the relevant fields. To manually configure your computer's DNS server settings, use the following DNS server address radio button. Enter the names of your DNS servers in the relevant fields. 7. Click OK to close the Internet Protocol TCP/IP properties dialog box. 8. Click OK to close the local area connection properties dialog box. Configuring advanced TCP/IP settings. The advanced button in the Internet Protocol TCP/IP properties dialog box displays several settings that are not available elsewhere. The advanced TCP/IP settings dialog box contains 4 tabs you can use to expand and override the settings from the simpler dialog box as shown in Figure 2.1. In the following sections, you will see how to configure advanced TCP/IP settings not available in the standard TCP/IP dialog box. Expanding the basic settings. In the basic configuration dialog box you saw earlier, you can enter one IP address, one subnet mask, and one default gateway. For the majority of systems, that's enough. But what if you want to configure a machine that can communicate on multiple IP addresses? For example, if you're setting up an IIS server, you may want it to answer to multiple IP addresses on a single physical network connection, such as a connection that links your server to the internet. Adding multiple IP addresses in this manner is called multi-homing. You may also want to specify multiple default gateways so that an outbound packet sent by your systems can be sent to whichever gateway is most efficient. You can do both of these things on the IP settings tab of the advanced TCP/IP settings dialog box. Figure 2.3 shows what it looks like. Your options on the IP settings tab include the following: IP address. The IP address control group lists the IP addresses currently defined for this network adapter. You can add new address bindings, edit existing bindings, or remove an additional address with the buttons at the bottom of the control group. Once you add an address here and close all open network properties dialog boxes, including the local area connection dialog box, any changes you make here will become effective. Default gateways. The default gateways control group shows the routing gateways that are currently defined for the computer you are working on. If you specify more than one default gateway, the system chooses a gateway by selecting the one that has the lowest cost, which you can enter arbitrarily. If that gateway is down or if it can't get packets to the destination system, Windows Server 2003 will try the next most expensive gateway. This process repeats until the packets arrive at their destination or until the system runs out of gateways to try. If the costs metrics are equal to two different gateways, the server will load balance the connection. So you can see here, figure 2.3, the IP settings tab of the advanced TCP IP settings dialog box. Configuring advanced DNS settings. The DNS tab shown in figure 2.4 may look kind of confusing, but the controls on it are reasonably easy to understand. The DNS tab of the advanced TCP IP settings dialog. First, you should understand the DNS server addresses. In order of use list, the list shows all the DNS servers currently defined for the client. Any DNS query is sent to the first server. If that server doesn't produce an answer, the query goes to the next one in the list. After a 1 second delay, this process continues until a server returns a valid answer or until all the servers have been tried. This list can contain up to 20 different DNS servers. You can add, edit, and remove servers with the buttons below the list, and you can change the order of a server in the list by selecting it and using the up and down arrows to the right of the list. The remaining settings pertain only to disconnection or network adapter. To be more precise, append primary and connection specific DNS suffixes. This radio button controls whether DNS will automatically append the primary DNS suffix and any connection specific suffixes. When it makes DNS requests, this can best be explained with an example. Say your primary DNS suffix is hsv.chalice.net and your connection specific suffix is eng.hsav.chalice.net. When this radio button is active and you initiate a DNS query for a machine named Hawk, DNS will first look for hawk.hsv.chalice.net and then for hawk.eng.hsv.chalice.net. Append parent suffixes on the primary DNS suffix. This checkbox, which is only active when append primary and connection specific DNS suffixes is selected, forces the resolver to tack on parent suffixes on the primary suffix. Using the preceding example, if you couldn't find Hawk in either eng.hsv.chalice.net or hsv.robychags.net, this would force DNS to look in robychags.net and then old.net. Append these DNS suffixes in order. This radio button and its associated controls allow you to provide a list of suffixes for DNS. These are used in place of the primary and connection specific suffixes, and they override any suffixes passed by the DHCP servers. DNS suffix for this connection. This field allows you to specify the default connection suffix you want to append to DNS queries. This overrides any suffix that may be specified by the DHCP server. Register this connection's address in DNS. This checkbox, which is on by default, tells DHCP client to register its name and IP address with the nearest dynamic DNS server. See Chapter 6 for more information on dynamic DNS. Use this connection's DNS suffix in DNS registration. This checkbox controls whether the primary or connection-specific DNS suffix is used when your client registers itself with the DNS server. So I'm going to leave it here today for this live stream. So thank you for spending the time with me and have a nice week.